At my brother's five-star wedding in Charleston, his coordinator led me away from table 1, handing my seat to his bride's cousin's random date. When I pulled my brother aside, he scoffed and told me, "Stand near the back wall so you don't ruin the family photos." I didn't yell. I walked over to the gift table, took back my velvet envelope containing a $75,000 check and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll stay out of your frame forever." He came running down the marble driveway in tears as my car pulled away into the night. My name is Yasmin Ellis. To understand how a lavish black-tie reception at an exclusive coastal estate in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina turned into the complete collapse of my brother's carefully constructed illusion, you have to understand the bitter dynamic that defined our family for over a decade. In my brother's eyes, family loyalty was never a two-way street. It was a transaction where I provided total financial security, and he offered empty promises in return. I am a 32-year-old chief operating officer and minority partner at a premier coastal structural engineering and marine infrastructure firm headquartered in downtown Charleston. For 12 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into my career. I worked 70-hour weeks evaluating shoreline mechanics, managing multimillion-dollar municipal dock revetments, and building a high-yield personal investment portfolio. Through discipline and fiscal responsibility, I purchased my own home in historic downtown Charleston, drove a sleek dark blue Porsche Panamera, and achieved total financial independence. My younger brother, Julian Ellis, 27, was the polar opposite. Julian was charming, superficial, and deeply insecure. He operated a small, perpetually unprofitable digital marketing agency that survived almost entirely because I quietly paid his office lease and covered his corporate overhead through my holding company. Julian lived in a world of pure performance, spending thousands of dollars on tailored suits, expensive wristwatches, and luxury rentals to convince the world he was a wealthy, self-made executive. Our mother, Marianne, was a gentle but conflict-averse woman who idolized Julian. Ever since our father passed away 8 years ago, leaving me as the executor of the family estate, Marianne treated Julian like a fragile prince who could do no wrong. Whenever Julian failed in a business venture or ran up massive personal debts, my mother would weep and beg me to step in as his big sister to save him from financial ruin. Out of respect for my late father, I always stepped up, serving as Julian's silent safety net. That toxic pattern reached its breaking point when Julian met his fiancée, Brianna Sterling. Brianna was the 26-year-old daughter of Evelyn Sterling, a prominent Charleston socialite whose entire life revolved around country club hierarchies, high society galas, and social media aesthetics. Brianna and her mother were obsessed with elite status, and Julian was terrified that they would discover his true financial reality. To secure Brianna's hand, Julian spun an elaborate web of lies. He led Brianna and her mother to believe that he was a wealthy tech mogul who owned his agency's prime waterfront office space, funded his own investment accounts, and single-handedly managed our family's assets. He relegated me to the background, describing me to the Sterlings as a quiet administrative manager who helped handle his paperwork. When Julian and Brianna announced their engagement, Brianna's mother, Evelyn, insisted on hosting a lavish multi-day wedding extravaganza at the Cypress Manor Estate, a sweeping multi-million-dollar historic plantation venue in Mount Pleasant overlooking the Wando River. The total bill for the wedding exceeded $140,000. When Julian realized he couldn't even afford the initial $10,000 venue deposit, he came to my office in downtown Charleston, trembling with anxiety, begging for my assistance. "Yasmin, if I can't cover these vendor payments, Evelyn will call off the wedding," Julian wept, sitting across from my desk. "She'll realize I don't have the cash reserve I claim to have. Please, just cover the deposits for me. I'll pay you back the second my agency closes its next big client." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Over the next 6 months, I quietly wired $40,000 directly to the wedding planners at Cypress Manor to cover the floral designs, the master catering contract, and the live orchestra. Furthermore, as a final wedding gift to help my brother establish his independence, I went to my private bank account and secured a $75,000 cashier's check. I planned to hand him this check inside a heavy navy velvet envelope on his wedding night, intended as a down payment for him to purchase his own commercial office space, provided he finally took responsibility for his life. The wedding day arrived on a humid, sunlit Saturday evening in early spring. The Cypress Manor estate was decorated like a high-fashion magazine shoot. White imported roses draped over grand marble archways, crystal chandeliers hung from ancient live oak trees, and dozens of high society photographers moved through the crowd. I arrived at the venue wearing a sophisticated, tailored emerald green silk dress, my hair swept up in a classic professional style. I walked into the grand ballroom during the cocktail hour, holding the heavy navy velvet envelope inside my clutch purse. As guests began finding their seats for the formal three-course dinner, I walked over to the elaborate mirror displaying the seating chart. I scanned the list for my name under Table 1, Immediate Family. I located my name listed right beside my mother, Marianne, and the groom's table. Relieved, I walked across the polished ballroom floor toward Table 1, located directly adjacent to the bridal dais. When I arrived at Table 1, however, I froze. Sitting in my designated chair directly beside my mother was a strange, boisterous young man in his mid-20s wearing a flashy suit. He was loudly laughing with Brianna's bridesmaids and drinking champagne. I stepped closer to the table and looked at the place card in front of the seat. My original acrylic name card bearing Yasmin Ellis, sister of the groom, had been unceremoniously removed and tossed onto a side tray. In its place was a folded paper napkin with handwritten ink that read, "Tyler's guest." Confused, I looked around the room. Every other table was completely packed with Brianna's wealthy high society friends, country club members, and local influencers. There was literally not a single open seat remaining in the entire ballroom. My mother, Marianne, looked up at me with an uncomfortable, guilty expression, whispering softly, "Yasmin dear, don't make a scene right now. Just let it be." Before I could process what was happening, the event coordinator tapped my shoulder and gestured toward the side corridor. I turned to see Julian walking out of the bridal suite, adjusting his tuxedo cufflinks. I walked over to my brother in the corridor, keeping my voice low and composed. "Julian, what is going on at Table 1? I asked calmly. "Why is a random guest sitting in my seat? Where am I supposed to sit for dinner?" Julian didn't look at me in the eye. He looked past my shoulder, checking to see if Brianna's mother was watching us. He let out an annoyed, exasperated sigh, as if my simple question was an unbearable burden. "Look, Yasmin, we had a seating emergency at the last minute," Julian said dismissively, lowering his voice. "Brianna's cousin Tyler brought an extra +1 who wasn't on the final RSVP list. Tyler's family contributed a lot to the floral aesthetic, so Brianna's mother insisted we give him a prime seat at Table 1. I stared at him, incredulous. "You gave away your only sister's seat at the head table to a cousin's uninvited +1? Julian, I paid $40,000 for your catering and floral deposits." Julian's expression hardened. He took a step closer to me, his tone turning sharp, arrogant, and cruel. "Stop throwing your money in my face, Yasmin," he snapped in a harsh whisper. "This is Brianna's dream wedding, and her mother hired a professional photography team from a national lifestyle magazine to shoot the head tables. They need an unbroken, high-fashion aesthetic surrounding the bride and groom." He looked up and down at my classic emerald dress with utter condescension. "To be completely honest with you," Julian continued, his words cutting like glass, "your look just doesn't fit the vibe of Table 1. You look like a stern corporate executive, not a high society socialite. Brianna didn't want you in the primary background shots." I felt a cold shock hit my chest, followed immediately by an absolute, icy clarity. "So where exactly do you expect me to sit, Julian?" Julian pointed casually toward the far back corner of the grand ballroom, a dark, unlit area near the service doors where catering staff were stacking empty trays near the structural support pillars. "Just go stand near the back wall during the speeches," Julian commanded coldly. "You can grab a plate from the buffet line later after the formal photography wraps up. Just stay near the wall so you don't ruin the family photos and framing for the videographers. It's not that big of a deal." He turned his back on me, straightening his tuxedo jacket, completely expecting me to bow my head, obey his order, and quietly vanish into the shadows of the room to save his precious aesthetic. For 12 years I had bankrolled his life. I had covered his rent, protected him from creditors, funded his wedding, and carried the heavy burden of being his silent guardian. And in return, on his wedding night, he shoved me against a wall so I wouldn't ruin his framing. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't create a scene in front of his wealthy guests. Instead, 28 years of misplaced sisterly devotion evaporated from my heart in a single microsecond. I turned around slowly and walked across the grand foyer toward the mirrored gift table. Resting inside a crystal display box was the heavy, dark navy velvet envelope containing my $75,000 bank cashier's check, along with the signed personal guarantee for his agency's new commercial lease. I reached into the display box, picked up my velvet envelope, and slid it smoothly back into my green leather clutch. Julian, who was walking toward the head table to take his seat beside Brianna, happened to turn around and saw me standing by the gift table holding the envelope. A sudden wave of panic flickered across his face. He quickly turned around and hurried back toward the foyer, realizing what was inside that navy wrap. "Yasmin, wait," Julian called out, his voice dropping its arrogant tone replaced by an edge of anxiety. "What are you doing with that envelope?" "That's the gift table." I turned to face my brother. I stood tall, my head held high, looking down at him with pure, unwavering authority. I reached into my purse, pulled out the printed card attached to the check, handed him the empty blank greeting card, and kept the $75,000 cashier's check safely inside my clutch. I looked straight into his eyes and spoke in a clear, resonant voice that carried across the quiet entryway. "Don't worry, Julian, I'll stay out of your frame forever." Without waiting another second, I turned on my heel, pushed open the massive mahogany double doors of the Cypress Manor estate, and walked out into the cool evening air. "Yasmin! Stop! Wait!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with sudden terror. He pushed past the event coordinator and sprinted down the wide white marble steps of the estate. The heavy navy velvet envelope was not just a wedding gift, it was the exact money he desperately needed to pay off his mounting agency debts and secure his new office lease on Monday morning. Without that money, his entire financial house of cards was about to explode. "Yasmin, please!" Julian screamed, running down the gravel driveway in his expensive tuxedo, his polished shoes kicking up dust. "I'm sorry. Come back inside. I'll move Tyler's guest. You can have the head seat. Please, I need that envelope." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I reached my dark blue Porsche Panamera parked in the VIP driveway, unlocked the doors, and stepped inside. I pressed the engine start button, listening as the powerful twin-turbo V8 engine roared to life with a deep, resonant rumble. Julian reached the side of my car just as I shifted into drive, banging his hands frantically against the driver's side window, tears of pure panic streaming down his face. "Yasmin, don't do this to me," he sobbed through the glass. "Brianna's father is watching. If you walk away with that check, my agency is ruined. I can't pay the lease." I rolled down my window 2 inches, looked at my sobbing, pathetic brother, and said calmly, "You wanted a perfect wedding without me in the picture, Julian. Now you get to live the rest of your life without me funding it." I rolled the window back up, pressed the accelerator, and guided the Porsche smoothly down the long oak-lined driveway of the estate, leaving my brother screaming my name in the dark. I drove straight back to my historic home in downtown Charleston. I poured myself a glass of chilled white wine, sat out on my second-story piazza, and listened to the gentle coastal breeze rustling through the palmetto trees. For the first time in 12 years, I felt entirely light, free, and unburdened. The next morning, Sunday, unfolded with catastrophic swiftness for Julian. At 8 o'clock sharp, I opened my laptop and contacted my corporate property manager. My holding company held the primary master lease on the 4,000-square-foot office suite Julian's marketing agency occupied in downtown Charleston. I formally issued a notice of non-renewal and immediate lease termination due to material breach of sublease terms. Next, I logged into my corporate banking portal and revoked Julian's secondary authorization on my business expense line, instantly freezing the corporate credit cards he had been using to pay for his personal luxury vehicle lease and designer wardrobe. Finally, I called my banker and redeposited the $75,000 cashier's check directly back into my high-yield private investment trust. By 10 o'clock that morning, my phone began vibrating uncontrollably. It was my mother, Marianne, weeping hysterically on the voicemail. "Yasmin, what have you done? Julian's mother-in-law, Evelyn, found out that you cancelled his office lease. Brianna is locking herself in the bedroom. They think Julian lied to them about his wealth. You are destroying your brother's marriage on his honeymoon. A few minutes later, Julian called me 17 times in a row. When I finally answered, his voice was hyperventilating, completely stripped of the arrogant posture he had displayed at Cypress Manor. "Yasmin, please," Julian begged, weeping uncontrollably into the receiver. Evelyn called her family lawyers. They're reviewing our prenuptial agreement because they realized I don't own the office building or the agency assets. They think I'm a fraud. If you don't transfer that $75,000 right now and re-sign my office lease, Brianna is filing for an immediate annulment. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping my morning coffee, completely unbothered by his frantic panic. "Julian," I said softly, my voice calm and unwavering. "You told me last night that I didn't fit your high society aesthetic. You told me to stand against the wall so I wouldn't ruin your framed life. Well, you got exactly what you asked for. You built a life out of lies, vanity, and disrespect, and now you have to stand in the middle of it all by yourself." "Yasmin, I'm your brother," he screamed, desperation dripping from every word. "Family is supposed to help family. Family doesn't discard the person who feeds them just to impress strangers," I replied firmly. "Do not call me again." I hung up the phone and blocked his number permanently. Over the following months, the illusion Julian had worked so hard to maintain completely collapsed under the weight of reality. Without my financial backing, his agency was evicted from its downtown office space within 30 days. Unable to maintain his luxury car payments or cover his personal debts, his creditors filed multiple collection suits against him in Charleston County Court. When Brianna and her mother, Evelyn, discovered that Julian was entirely broke and lived off his sister's generosity, Brianna filed for a full legal annulment within 6 weeks of the wedding ceremony. The high society wedding photos that Julian was so desperate to protect became nothing more than a painful memory of a marriage that lasted less than 2 months. Julian was forced to liquidate his expensive wardrobe, sell his watch collection, and move into a small one-bedroom basement apartment on the outskirts of North Charleston, taking an entry-level sales job just to cover his basic living expenses. My mother attempted to guilt me into bailouts for months, but I stood like an absolute iron wall. I informed her that while I would always ensure her personal medical needs and living expenses were taken care of through my father's trust, not a single penny of my hard-earned money would ever reach Julian again. Today, as I sit on the balcony of my downtown Charleston home, watching the afternoon sun reflect off the waters of the Cooper River, my heart is filled with profound clarity and peace. I no longer carry the exhausting weight of saving someone who only valued me for what I could provide. I built my life through hard work, integrity, and self-respect, and I surrounded myself with people who value me for who I am, not what I do for them. I learned that you must never allow anyone, no matter if they share your blood or bear your family name, to treat you as an inconvenient footnote in a life you helped build. True self-respect means having the courage to step out of toxic frames, take back your worth, and let those who disrespected you face the reality of their own choices. Personal advice: never allow toxic relatives or self-absorbed family members to exploit your financial generosity while treating your presence as an embarrassing afterthought. When someone demonstrates that they value your resources but disrespect your humanity, cut off the supply immediately and permanently. True sisterly or brotherly love requires mutual respect, honor, and accountability, not silent endurance of public humiliation. Stand tall in your accomplishments, protect your boundaries without guilt, and remember that walking away from disrespect is the highest form of self-respect you can ever show to yourself.